Well, first of all, Simon Hamilton there, Sammy Wilson, you'll be glad to hear, isn't going to pass on all the pain to the incoming DUP minister. So where are the easy cuts to be had?
Well, I think there are. I mean, sometimes this whole debate is looked at on the basis of which frontline service do you cut, and certainly there's been a lot of concentration on that over the last number of days. I think what Sammy has outlined, that there may be an opportunity to, at least if not totally offset these cuts, to maybe take some of them in year and look at the in-year underspend that habitually goes on within departments, try to offset some of the cuts, because Sammy's absolutely right. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There is much greater cuts coming next year. I think also partial deferral it buys us a little bit of time to start seriously looking at some of those easier options that I believe are out there. The number of assembly members that we have, the number of departments that we have, indeed the number of quangos that we have in Northern Ireland. I think it would be wrong if you have a whole focus across the water in Great Britain on cutting away with and doing away with and merging some quangos, that we in Northern Ireland leave that whole swathe of arm's length bodies that sit there and leave them untouched. I think that's where we can get stuck in and have some easy wins.
Cuts, that could be debatable. But let's just pick up on one of the things and try and step through this in-year savings. And obviously we saw there earlier the Social Development Minister saying that he would have to give up some money come June because of the Royal Exchange development in Belfast, which his department had committed money towards, which isn't likely now to go ahead. So he hands that money back into the pot. Mitchell McLaughlin, he's also making a bid there on the floor of the Assembly to get it back again. But in this current environment, chances are the Finance Minister will say thank you very much.
I would say very likely. At the end of the day, the Social Development Minister, as you would expect, has put down an indication of the shopping list that would emerge. Nevertheless, the priority here will be to manage these cuts that are being imposed. The Assembly has very little power to respond to that. In particular, my party have been arguing the need for greater fiscal powers to enable us to, if you like, determine our own direction of travel. But in these particular
circumstances, what sort of figure are we talking about there with, say, that one development? I mean, how much money is the Social Development Department likely to be giving back into the centre?
Well, I think their likely budget was in the order of £70 million.
So it's a fair big chunk out of that 128.
Yeah, and it'd be very, you could see that there would be a very strong case being made that at least some of it should come back to the parent department. But there's also going to be a very significant resistance from other ministers. For example, health and education, both of them between them absorbed over £250 million in the last round of cuts. So there's significant pressures building up here, and I think in terms of what we can do, there are no quick fixes. The monitoring round is designed precisely for this type of management of the budget, and if there's a chunk of money taken out by Westminster, we should do in a strategic way, the necessary work there to prepare the ground to prevent that happening in the future. But in the meantime, we're all very vulnerable to that, and every single spending department is particularly vulnerable.
What about the argument, Simon Hamilton, that we should follow the example of London, which has ring-fenced health, says health can keep all its own money? Should we do the same here?
Well, I think whenever you compare health in England and Wales to health here, you're actually comparing apples with oranges. It's not exactly the same. The Health Minister, I'm sure, would be the first to tell you that we have social services and public safety as well in the Health Department in Northern Ireland. A lot of health expenditure in England and Wales is carried out by local government as well. And I do think certainly I think it would be wrong that any cuts would affect frontline services within health or education or anywhere else.
Frontline services is a sort of the phrase that all the politicians are coming up with, but it's sometimes hard to define what's the back line and what's the front line when you get into this, isn't it?
I think it's wrong, certainly, that anything that would be done in terms of cuts would affect directly patients and the service that they would receive. I'm not so sure that there would be much support out there for ring fencing and just insulating the wasteful administration and bureaucracy that there is very much prevalent within the NHS in Northern Ireland. So I think whenever we talk about health here and health across the water, we need to be careful to differentiate between the two types of expenditure, that there is very different systems that we have here and there, and we also shouldn't be trying to, I think, go out of our way to protect any wasteful expenditure that there is within a budget that accounts for something like 50% of the overall expenditure within Northern Ireland.
Of course, that percentage can only spiral beyond the 50% if you ring fence health, which is already at over 48%, that's the precise kind of percentage, but it will actually spiral upwards as the other departments are forced to absorb all of the cuts, and I don't think we get to keep that balance.
And what about what the DUP, Simon Hamilton and others have been saying recently about we should be doing away with departments, we should be doing away with MLAs? Sinn Féin singing off the same hymn sheet there?
Well, I've actually dealt with this question in an earlier one of these programmes, where I think we should be prepared to look at all of the options. I do think that that doesn't give us the quick response to the circumstances that we need, because of a considerable amount of discussion and negotiation. I do think, for example, that we can address the number of quangos. I do think that we can address the remuneration of the senior civil servants, who are getting 22% above the equivalent that they could get in private industry here. I think these issues can be addressed to demonstrate that we're actually serious, but also ensure that nothing is left off the list for consideration.
Well, on that theme, myself and Jim were looking at First Minister's question time. He was asked about the review of public administration, which is the reorganisation of the councils, and he said, look, this was an Ulster Unionist policy. He responded to Baz McRae. We went back through the records just whilst he was talking. 2001 manifesto, we must cut all these layers of administration, we must cut the quangos. That was the Ulster Unionist manifesto. We're still talking about it. We've still got the same number of councils.
But we've cut the size of the Unionist Party since then, so it's a start. I mean, when he makes a point,
they're the quango here, are they? Yeah.
That's one efficiency I certainly welcome anyway. But I think certainly no matter what's happening in terms of RPA, in terms of the number of councils, what the current minister has done is identify a significant amount of savings that could be made, sort of back office, through procurement, through waste and other services that are delivered in what might be described as not the most efficient way at this minute in time. So regardless of what's happening with RPA or not happening with RPA, there is still significant savings that can be made within local government, just as there can be within central government as well.
And the gun, though, is now against your heads. I mean, and we've seen the coalition government at Westminster, whatever you think of them, they've come out very quickly, and today they've identified the quangos that they're going to get rid of within a couple of weeks of taking office. As Mark points out, this is something that goes back to Ulster Unionist promises in 2001. I mean, surely it's not beyond your wit, Mitchell McLaughlin and yours, Simon Hamilton, to get together as parties and decide where to make the cuts, and tell us about it next week.
Well, I mean, let's see what they deliver, you know, because it is very easy. Like, you can spend that amount of time in opposition and you can map out what you're going to say if there is a transfer of administration, which of course was predictable. At least they were able to anticipate it. So I do think they had that particular press release.
And you've had several years in government here.
Well, the point, that I would like to make is that now across the parties you are actually hearing questions arising. I mean, why are we blocking ESA when it would cut back on bureaucracy and release millions of pounds back into education? Why can't we have agreement on the Independent Boundary Commission's report on the boundary changes to allow the substantial elements of the RPA to go forward? Because that would also release very, very significant sums for either reallocation or to address these deficits. And, you know, why can't we develop the Long Case site? These issues, I think, are giving us the quick
There's one
fixes.
answer to all of that, though, surely, and it's politics in Northern Ireland. It's always different.
But that's the thing to do, is get the focus on it, and you do hear all of the parties now coming on to these issues. I mean, come up 2 or 3 times in today's debate. So I think the issue is at the top of the politicians' list.
Certainly the system that we have is different to the one that they have across the water, but what we shouldn't be afraid of, in fact, what should be now happening, is that we all get a bit of a dose of realism about a lot of things, and I don't think we can sit here any longer with unnecessary departments. I don't think we can sit here any longer with a whole countless raft of quangos without actually sitting down and doing some of the work that you're talking about. And I think now that when the choice is between continuing with countless quangos or unnecessary departments or actually cutting frontline services, I think the choice is easy for politicians, and we should get stuck down into that serious job of work that there is there.
So we're going to have to create a quango to examine how many quangos we've got, and then we can have a bonfire of the quangos.
Get you a place on that quango.
Okay, that's good. We'll be the cutting quango.
Stormont Live is a frontline service. I'm convinced of that.
But not our cameraman, only us. Sorry.
Well, no, couldn't do it without them. Thank you both very much indeed.